when I looked at the programme and I saw that I was being asked to facilitate these three fine individuals to tease out some thoughts about the role of leadership in a sustainable world, I did think to myself, either I've done something really bad to irritate Sonu more than I understood before now, or this is going to be a very special moment in my life, because these are three remarkable individuals, as you've already heard, and I think they've got some remarkable insights into the nature of the challenge that we face today and how to bring all of the energy that is out there today around making a more sustainable world, how to bring that to the point where it actually delivers things for people in practice in such a way that lives are improved for people today without screwing it up for people tomorrow. Same old story, but we keep coming back to that issue about what we need to do in practice. So we're not going to have great big opening statements about this. The theme that we're dealing with here is leadership. Leadership, obviously, in different sectors, from a governmental point of view, civil society, business point of view, and the role of the chief executive or the leader in an organization to help marshal energy available to us in society today to make things happen. That's really what it's all about. Now, just a word of warning, if you don't ask any really intelligent, interesting questions, I fear that they will just prattle on anyway, okay? So if I were you, I'd get some really intelligent, interesting questions and contributions going in your mind right now so that we don't have to rely on this spontaneous eloquence that we've seen so much of. Again, I'm going to try and take just a couple of questions together, comments together. So Tim has decided to cheat by asking the first question of Richard.
Yeah. So it's a question which I genuinely...
Actually, I don't think you're on.
I told you. You just... Shall I talk rubbish until it's loud enough and then ask the deeper meaning? Okay. So, it's really weird how we live in a culture where there is a cult of leadership. The CEO is sex machine, babe magnet, all of that stuff. And actually, most public company chief executives are actually pretty weak. If their share price goes down, they actually get fired. The life expectancy in a job with FTSE 100 chief executives is really short. And that seems to me, as an observer, not only a bad thing, but also, I want to get your opinion as to whether the world is becoming increasingly bland because of the pressure to monetize, to use accountants to judge every idea. I was thinking, as you were talking about Virgin Galactic, when the telephone was invented, or when the steam engine was originally invented, they weren't invented because there were accountants who'd done a business plan. They were to do the sheer quest of excitement to do something. And I don't know whether it's because I've become an old fart, but it appears to me that most companies, most major organizations, most public authorities seem to have their threshold of dreaming is so fucking low that I'm not actually that hopeful that actually any of those sectors will deliver the globe-changing solutions, and it's going to be the mad people like you. Well, I mean mad as in you have a passion, you would probably retrofit that it was a business idea, but actually you really just want to do it.
Yeah, or like you, or like, I mean, I think if I was a public company, I'm sure I wouldn't have done most of the things I do. And I've never, I think, I've never ever thought of myself as a businessman. I mean, I've ever since I was 16, when I left school, I wanted to create a magazine that was campaigning against the Vietnamese War, and the business aspect was just to try to make sure the magazine, I could pay the bills, and keep the magazine going. And so throughout my life, I've just thrown myself into my passions where I think I can make a difference, and then just after the event, ask the accountants to try to make sure that the bills stack up at the end of the year. I suspect we're a similar make. But,
Sonu, any thoughts about the need to be irrational, passionate, out there, not always bound by the numbers? I mean, you have to get the numbers right. I mean, the privilege of being a passionate CEO is a wonderful one, but if the numbers don't work, your passion doesn't count for anything.
No, exactly. So obviously the numbers have to work, but you have to be passionate, because if you're not passionate about what you're doing, you won't be able to survive all the roadblocks on the way to achieving something. It's quite a long way between having an idea and seeing it realized. And the nice thing is the idea at the beginning and some bit of creativity at the beginning, but then there's a lot of struggle, and then of course it opens, whether it's a resort or a new business or a concept, and so you need to be passionate. By far that's the most important. And then you hope that if you're doing something that's new but true, you know, it's a new idea, but it's true, it's underlying what people want, then the numbers will follow. And I think one needs to guide oneself very much from that basis, is that a successful entrepreneur has to have that sensitivity to an extent as to what a client will want. Market research, I mean, like, I think Steve Jobs is a perfect one, who, you know, the late Steve Jobs, unfortunately, was a perfect one on this particular point, where he said that market research would have never have defined the personal computer or the iPad or the iPhone. People quite often don't know what they want until they see it. And so that's the success of an entrepreneur. But sometimes, of course, people see it and they don't like it, but you just hope that they do. And I think that's the definition between a successful, passionate entrepreneur and one that fails. And sometimes a successful entrepreneur will have 5 successes and then 1 big failure, but we mustn't forget the successes.
It's quite comforting to try and fit sustainability into that idea, isn't it, that people don't know what they want until they see it. I'd love to think that sustainability was a bit like that. They don't know that they want it yet, but wow, when they see it, they're really, really going to love it. But we've worked quite hard to do that, and we haven't quite pulled that off yet. Right, I've got a starting comment here from Costas. Anybody else? Do I see any other hands up? You're just feeling your way with this one, aren't you? You'll get ticked off by Sonu in a moment for not being participative. So I warn you, you'd better get some thoughts going. Yes?
Related to what you've been discussing right now, but from a slightly different angle. 3 years ago, Marriott Hotels did something very unlike a hotel group in my experience. They took $6 million of their money and they sunk it into a partnership to create a new national park in the Amazon in partnership with some local communities and the government of Amazonas, which seemed rather shocking for me for a heads and beds company to start acting like World Wildlife Fund. And there's a question related to this, if you'll allow me. I tracked down Bill Marriott Jr. because I wanted to ask why. Why would you do this? And his response to me was that they did an internal survey among their guests, and 22% of them said that, you know, sustainability, meaning environmentally friendliness, mattered significantly in their decision making. I said, okay, but doesn't that mean 68% or 78% don't care? And then he said to me, well, do you think I turn my back on 22% of my market? And I think it's growing. So my question to you is, Richard and Sonu in this case, and you know, to the degree that you're able, Tim, in your unique situation there, from the business sense, can you track specifically, are you able to say right now that your initiatives in terms of sustainability are delivering a financial return for your business? Because it's the single most frequent question that I get from CEOs and business leaders in terms of the return, the ROI. Why should we be doing this? We know the broader reasons, but I'm asking you as CEOs of businesses.
Okay. I'm sure that individual Virgin businesses would track it. I don't personally, but I do think that the overall, you know, you're building a brand, and you want your brand to be well respected, and if the overall brand is well respected, then you know the halo effect is likely, I think, to you know to be good for the brand, and so I think you know I think you know doing these things is very important. I mean I personally have never sort of tried to monitor it, but maybe sorry, I don't know if you've tried to monitor it more.
Yeah, I mean, on the back of our guest departure form, you know, we have a guest questionnaire, and there are a couple of ecological questions. You know, how ecological did you find us? Was it important in your decision, and so on? And they're ticked quite highly, around the 70% mark. So at least that's what our guests are saying on the back of the form. And 80% of our guests fill it up because it's the general manager's departure letter. It's on the back. They're on holiday, so they have some spare time. We're not running business hotels, so they tend to sort of spend a couple of minutes filling it up. So we get quite a big percentage that fill it up. So I think there's that side, but I'll concur with what Richard says. It's a brand, isn't it? You're creating a brand value, and what is a brand? A brand is a sum of, like a pointless painting, it's a sum of all those experiences that an individual guest or client has of the brand and their experience with the brand. And certainly our sustainability initiatives create that consistency of the brand. And the more consistent a brand, the more loyal the customer is. There's a direct correlation between consistency of brand message and loyalty of customers. So yeah, I think it's definitely, to answer your question short, yeah, people do notice it. It is important. It is profitable for us.
I mean, there is a lot of work, Cos, as you know, on actually monetizing what the bottom line benefits are from outperformance on environmental and social issues. And a lot of companies that are not quite as brand-led as these two are have to come up with extremely detailed calculations as to what their investments in sustainability have meant for the shareholder. So you now have one of the UK's leading retailers, Marks & Spencer, M&S, that produces its annual report on its sustainability initiative called Plan A. And the most important thing as far as they're concerned for its shareholders is that Plan A has made a £70 million contribution, positive contribution to M&S profits. 70 million is 10% of M&S profits. So it's a very significant number. In investor terms, it is, quotes, material, because most investors don't think that things are material unless they add up quite a lot. So there are lots of examples of this now. Company after company around the world does really quite geeky calculation of monetized bottom line benefit, and when they really get confident about it, they do the calculation of the top line growth as well. And you can see how that top line growth analysis is beginning to impact much more effectively with companies that have really worked out how to go after this very aggressively. So I'm happy to say the business case for sustainable development has matured a huge amount since it was first advanced in 1992 at the Earth Summit with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And there are lots of companies who don't find any of this stuff difficult at all because it hasn't actually ever cost them a penny. It's only ever been bottom line benefit and increasingly now top line opportunity. So it is for me still wondrous that that not every company has found their way to that win-win, but unfortunately that's still the case. Yes?
I'm Gabriele Burgio. I've been running a company in Spain with 400 hotels, and we have started 5 years ago all these studies, I would say studies and practice on sustainability.
Slightly closer.
Yeah, and what was amazing is to answer your question about return on investments, I would say there are two families. The first one is the clear return on investment that you have, and 5% of our savings in energy, water use, and garbage production was obtained only by training. So training people how to do things, really the know-how, how to do things, how to prepare the rooms, how to clean them, etc., was surprising, and 5% is a big money for us, was about 3.5 million euros, only with training. Then, of course, if you start changing the way that you do things, so you have to make investments, or you have to change structure, pipes, and conditioning systems, then you go back to the same HP12 calculator and you see what you spend, what your cash flows, and you have a better feeling of what it is. But in general, it's surprisingly profitable. I would say the second return on investment that is not quantifiable is the way that you drive all your people on a new mission. And we made studies, internal studies, with our 20,000 employees, and about 90% were very happy to participate actively on projects about sustainability and environment. So, without talking about the customers, but what was the key surprise was the happiness and the enthusiasm of the people working on the project.
Great.
Good point.
Okay, I'll come over to this table here. Yeah. Why don't we take both your points, one after the other. And remember, our theme is leadership. Try and stick to our theme if we can. And just remind us who you are, just for in case anybody's fallen asleep.
Hi, sorry, I'm Andrew. I work for a PR company in London that does some work for Sixth Senses called Mission. It was noticeable during the the riots, the anti-capitalist riots in London quite recently, that there was kind of amorphous anger against big business and big business leaders. And it seems to me one of the reasons that is that big business talks the language of the enemy the whole time. So it talks about profits, it talks about growth, it talks about consumption and consumers as its customers. As business leaders, how do you go about convincing the wider population, particularly those that are perhaps more environmentally aware, that business is part of the solution, not part of the problem? And how do you go about changing the language that businesses use to describe what they do and how they quantify success?
Jeffrey, are you on the same sort of theme?
Not far off.
Not far off, good enough.
I was going to explore a bit further what you've been saying, Jonathan, yourself.
Jeffrey, a little bit closer.
I'm very bad with these.
Should we do the first one first? Or?
Is that all right now?
Yep.
I was going to explore a bit more what you've been saying, Jonathan, about some of the big, boring public companies, quite accepting Richard's point that he could never have done what he did in a public company. But what is... Ah, like that?
Yeah. Bravo.
I mentioned the boring old public companies that have taken this up, because really where one gets a sense of excitement in the environment field these days is with business meetings. I come away depressed from the politicians and the environmentalists, but a business meeting is always very exciting. So why have these CEOs of big public companies, with all the constraints that you have there, and big names like Philips, Nissan, Marks and Sparks you mentioned, many General Electric, so many of them. And I don't think it is just the bottom line, Jonathan, as you mentioned, because talking to people like Stuart Rose, they're actually surprised by the £70 million profit. So what is it that snagged in the imagination that they did it? Is it loyalty to the staff? Is it retention of staff? I don't know. I'm just
okay, so those two are really linked. Those are two really valid perceptions about business often being seen as a problem, a barrier to this, and yet the reality, a lot of the world's large companies are now taking more of a lead on this than governments, or even, dare I say it, than some aspects of civil society.
Yeah, I think, and maybe we could also bring in, Jonathan's impassioned attack on billionaires yesterday as well, and wealthy people. I think that, first of all, I think I agree with most of what Jonathan said yesterday. I think if you are lucky enough to become a successful business leader or a successful entrepreneur, and there is a large element of good fortune in that, because extreme wealth comes with it, extreme responsibility also comes with that. And I think that if leaders are not responsible citizens, and if they do not redistribute that wealth by either creating more jobs or starting new businesses or tackling some of the seemingly intractable issues of this world, then I think the current form of capitalism is questionable, because it is fairly obscene, the kind of wealth that can come with being successful in this particular profession, i.e. as being an entrepreneur. And so, to repeat myself, enormous responsibility goes with it. I think that as far as companies are concerned, I think if they can become forces for good, and if they can, screw the usual way of doing business, which is, just trying to satisfy shareholders every quarter, and if they can, really look at what kinds of differences they can make to the local community, nationally, internationally, depending on their size, that in the end, their bottom line may not suffer, and yet they can make enormous differences. So the staff who work for those companies will be that better motivated. They'll be that much prouder of working for the company. The brand will be that much stronger as a result. Therefore, people will be willing to buy more products from it. And and you know, and so it is a circle, extremely positive circle. Marks and Spencer's, you know, I mean, you know, I've written a page about this in my book. You know, I think that Stuart Rose suddenly realised he could save 70 million and motivate his staff at the same time. You know, win-win all round, and just went for it. And good on him. And may every other company in the world follow suit.
Yeah, I think we need to put it in the context of, firstly, the title of this panel, which is Sustainability as the New Normal, and also think about the issue of measures as well, because what you measure creates behaviour. So we measure GDP, and politicians work in a certain way, and such as for public companies, unfortunately, the analysts measure profitability. So that guides business leaders to behave in that way. And I think what's happening is you've actually got quite a lot of enlightened leaders of public companies who realize the virtuous circle. We operate a virtuous circle. It's one of our things in our Sun card, which every host, you know, as I mentioned, we call our employees hosts, follow, which is essentially, you know, create an inspiring concept that, you know, and values that inspire your host, your employees. They're then totally inspired and they create a fantastic experience or a fantastic product. And the guests love it. Like here, 50% of our guests are repeat guests, including Eric Scotto. That's how I met him. I think we have a lady over there who's also a return guest, and there was Mr. and Mrs. Weiss who were here earlier. So we have 50% of our guests in a long-haul destination, repeat guests. So they love what we're doing. They come back and again, and then we become profitable. And that's the virtuous circle that we use internally. And private companies have the benefit of realizing things like that and just talking about it. With a public company, if Stuart Rose talked in those manners and said, you know, really the source of our profitability is not next quarter's quarterly earnings, I'm not looking at that. If he said, I don't care about the next 6 months' quarterly earnings or the next 2 years, you know, you can imagine what would happen to him as a CEO and what the board would do to him. But in reality, I think a lot of CEOs of public companies actually do think about 2, 3, 5 years, and sustainability is obviously an important issue. So they have this balancing act where, with their employees and internally, they're saying, you know, this is really the way to the future. This is what we need to focus on. We need to be sustainable. We need to have this passion. We need to all rally behind a cause. And then, of course, the stock market, of course, his language and his phrases are totally different. And what would be nice would be that the stock market and companies, you know, had a similar language, so you don't have to have these schizophrenic CEOs who are behaving in one way internally on a day-to-day basis, and then as soon as they start talking to analysts or banks or institutions, you know, change their language, change their uniforms, and so on. So I think that's a dilemma that goes on in public companies to an extent at the moment. And I think there are a lot of CEOs of public companies who are very enlightened businessmen, but may not let on.
Tim? At the risk of offending my host once more, first of all, your question early on I thought was lovely. Should a company be behaving like the WWF? I'd have turned it round. Why the fuck is the WWF behaving like a hotel company? Because I think one of the real problems we have is there's very little righteous anger left in the world. As everybody's become corporate, you can price absolutely everything. There's a fake accounting method for looking at how things affect your bottom line, your top line, all the rest of it. And it's a very rosy picture we paint of big corporate life. And it just isn't like that. It's because we want it to be like that. Chief executives want to be seen like that. They've got kids, they go out to parties, they go to fundraisers. But when you actually get into the core of most of these companies, you will find that the real lag is within the colleagues and staff in there that are actually trapped in an operating mechanism or structure, an organogram that is actually probably 20 or 30 years out of date. And that would be actually as true of Marks and Spencer as anywhere else. Marks and Spencer happens to be the blue-eyed boy, because we all talk about it, and Stuart Rose is kind of handsome and wears a good suit and he can talk well, which he does, and it is a pretty good company. But actually, they fuck their producers like every other big supermarket, as does the co-op. John Lewis actually doesn't. It's proper. And I think what's actually happening is you're seeing the death of major public corporations. I would guess within 30 years, many of the world's big public corporations will start to shrivel on the vine as the best people in many of these companies start their own companies, which will be capitalist. There will be about social enterprise elements as well, because to attract the best and brightest of your generation to work with you, you need to offer the opportunity of excitement, making money, but also being able to sleep really well at night because you are taking responsibility for being a good citizen. So while I do salute what you say, John, about there's been a huge change in corporate life, actually environmentalists too often want to be part of the establishment and see the good news, which actually isn't there. I run a business, the Eden Project. We have it's small compared to everybody else here. It's a £20 million turnover. When you look at the environmental impact of what we do, we have over £1.5 billion has come back into the Cornish economy by being ruthless about our local sourcing. But don't tell me, other than the brand value which attracts people's loyalty to come to Eden, the actual cost of doing a lot of these things that are environmentally friendly is greater than doing it in an unenvironmentally friendly way. Waste management, doing great recycling and waste management and getting down to almost a zero waste thing, costs us about 150 grand a year more than sending it all to landfill and not giving it to us. But of course we also know when you run a company that your brand will suffer if your competitors are doing things which seem to be morally righteous. Therefore it's almost a cost that you don't quite know how to price, but you don't dare not do it in case you die on the vine as being seen as being an old fart.
Eric, no dying on the vine here. I'll come to you. So a couple of comments now.
Which was just a quick comment on what you said. Is I don't know if you remember, before we had annual results a long time ago. Then the analyst invented the semi-annual results for public company. And some years ago, they invented the quarterly results for public company. And unfortunately, in most of the companies, the CEO are more thinking about their stock price and what they're going to be able to do in the next 3 months to be successful at the beauty contest, because the analysts are just looking at that, you know. And when you're talking about sustainability, you need to do things that you will get a return in 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. We are stuck in the stock market because of that mechanism to make an analysis of the companies. So the financial market has to evolve also, and I hope we will go in that direction at some point. The crisis we facing today is an historical crisis, and everything around is linked to that.
Okay.
Okay, hi, I'm Ufi Ibrahim. I am the Chief Executive of the British Hospitality Association in the United Kingdom. And I do think there is a distinction between entrepreneurs and chief executives who are employed. And it's really the appetite and the ability to be able to move forward with risk. So if you are an entrepreneur, you can decide to take that risk, embrace it, and move forward. But with a chief executive, you are accountable to a group of individuals who can actually make a different decision to yourself in terms of the risk appetite for the entire organization, as opposed to an individual and their dream, chasing that dream. So there is a distinction. Now, perhaps to drive change in this structure, which actually prevents real leadership from coming out of chief executives, we have to question how we can actually bring that change up to that level where that change can be driven. And I think there are two things that haven't been touched upon yet. One is diversity in terms of chief executives. So long as the gatekeepers are always those individuals who have a certain type of risk profile, creating that change is very difficult, especially if it comes from women, for example. We have 3 gentlemen here, 4 gentlemen in fact, no women, very few women's voices being heard through the entire symposium. And that's very true of business as well at a certain level. And so there's diversity there is not getting through. And the second aspect is also leadership and where it comes from within an organization. And I'm talking now about public organizations rather than entrepreneurial-driven initiatives. Sometimes leadership can come from below, from a completely different area of the company. How can that be channeled to actually get to the level where it can make a real difference? How can that get to the board level where the decisions really are driven? And the chief executive, yes, they have the role to convince the board, but at the end of the day, the board is now usually making much more of the decisions.
Are my gentlemen colleagues staying quiet at this point? Surely not. You're so keen to get in there.
I was just looking at this beautiful woman, so your turn. Okay. We should have more women. You should have more women here in the future.
Exactly.
I mean, it's
Eva mentioned it yesterday, actually.
Okay.
So we'll have more women on the panel next year. In fact, unfortunately, Mariam Zulfa, she should have been on the panel at some point as the female Minister of Tourism. And
I mean, I was in America a couple of weeks ago and at a conference of women, and actually said that I thought that boards should, like in Norway, they should be forced to have 50% women, 50% men on their boards. And I asked 10,000 women in the audience to see whether they agreed with me. And only about 10 women thought that this should be a legal requirement, which I was very surprised about. But I personally think unless you actually force it through legally, you're just not. It's just not going to happen. And so I would say if you force it through that you would have to have 50% women here in future, unless you do that, you might get one. Anyway, so what do people think about boards forcing 50% women on their boards?
I think it's a great idea. You need to find the women. I mean, in our case, it's the other way around. The woman dominates the board. In terms of Eva and I as a couple in
So why isn't Eva here?
I'm subservient. Yeah, I'd like that. If I could have 50% equality, that would be great. Be able to say something and get some. Yeah.
So on we have equality on our board, and what's really interesting is we did a staff survey 18 months ago of all colleagues, asking them if they were me, what would be the one change they'd like to make in the organisation. And I was gobsmacked at what the favourite thing was. It was to have equality of authority. Not actually, they weren't talking about board representation, they were talking about the balance of a male and female approach to things, because we talk a lot about that. But one of the problems talking about boards, what I'm about to say is really odd, maybe. I know that what you're supposed to say is about how you value everybody, and we go for consensus, and we create a landscape to get approval, which is you lead people on. There are times, though, that what makes you an entrepreneur is against people who aren't entrepreneurs. And I notice this all the time, both in my trust, which is I've got trustees who run some of the biggest companies in the world, but they couldn't own a corner shop. The weirdest thing is, an entrepreneur, that's one of the reasons I loathe banks, is not because of banks, it's because they steal the language of entrepreneurism when the only fucking risk they take is with other people's money. I believe you haven't got the right to call yourself an entrepreneur unless the risks you've taken have been with your own damn house, because then you know what risk really is. So if you're leading a company, and is everybody around that boardroom equal? Actually, I know I ought to say yes, but I don't feel it. To the fibre of my being, I feel that if you are not capable of taking giant risks in your life, strategic risks, making decisions, because you've always lived like that, a bit feral, if you haven't done that, you haven't got quite the same rights, except those rights that I give you. I.e., if you know that you are a bit wild at heart, and that out of every 3 ideas, 1.5 will be madly bankruptable, but 1.5 will be really good, you do, if you're sensible, employ some people that you really respect, that put on let me look at it this way, Tim, that is actually fucking crazy, get back in your box. But you need people to test it, so that's caution as opposed to negativeness. But really, the reason you're a chief executive of a private company, and really if you were appointed as a chief executive of an inspired public company, what on earth are you doing being an equal if you're there? Because you should be doing it because you have a vision and a direction, and all you need is checks and balances to make sure that your madder moments are just tempered for long enough for you to have a look inside your soul.
Good point.
Is there any difference about the quality of leadership for sustainability-driven enterprises, or is it just like any other area of the economy, of society, of concern? Is there anything qualitatively different about the sort of leadership required to make a success of things in the sustainability world?
Well, you need to have skills that change, because to make sustainability the new norm, we need substantial change in our traditional ways. We almost need to break our leg reset it in a different way and start walking in a different way. So that's, that requires a huge amount of change. So in terms of leadership, you need leaders who are prepared to continuously change. I mean, the body changes every cell in 7 years. And to hit any of these deadlines that we've been talking about, companies need to really change in that speed as well, in terms of the people, the policies, the attitude, the approach, the whole thing, and of course the board. And Ufi's point is very valid. Change is extremely difficult when you have a board that don't really want to have too much change, don't want to take on too much risk. And of course, even if a chief executive is all for it and all for the change, he does have to balance things between what he tells his board, so they don't think he's totally loopy and they have to get rid of him. So it's a huge, huge challenge for a chief executive of a company at the moment, yeah. Especially when you don't own it.
Jeremy?
Some CEOs are sort of touched with a big finger somehow during their tenure. So I'm thinking Ray Anderson at Interface and Lee Scott at Walmart. And then great things happen. Targets are set and the wheels turn in the way that Jeffrey was saying. And this is very impressive when it happens. My view is it doesn't happen very much. And certainly not enough to really drive genuine change. Most big public company CEOs are parts of theocracies. I'm thinking the energy utilities, the banking sector, and therefore they appoint, in their own likelihood, in their own likeness, they appoint theocrats. And you just reel off some of the names: Fred Goodwin, Ken Lay, Tony Hayward, Lloyd Blankfein. I mean, what do we think of when we think of these people? And that's just the folk that have come immediately to mind. And at the other end of the chain, as it were, when you look at the entrepreneurial world, most of us are venture capital funded. We have to be. And if I can just tell one anecdote here to illustrate my experience of venture capitalists. Of course, it's nothing to do with my own company. It's a company I happen to know that's a bit like my company. But one day the founder, was thinking, crikey, how do I get out of this job of running something that is now, turning into an engine I don't want to run? Richard must have had this experience a number of times. So the managing director of Sony walks in off the street and says, I'm fed up of making toxic gizmos that nobody really needs. I want to work with you for 10 years. I might be able to help you. Yes, maybe you can. And then, of course, you talk to the venture capitalists who get to know this guy, and their view, their considered view, these people who, run the VC model, short-term returns, everything else, is that this guy is not CEO material. He's merely been managing director of Sony in Western Europe. He's not CEO material. The reason is he's quiet. He's a listener. I forget who made the point. Was it you, Jonathan, about the business school textbooks say that the listeners are best CEOs because they're leaders and managers as well, in the way that we entrepreneurs rarely are, kind of thing. So my experience is looking across the tableau is that the VCs kind of appoint, and they get rid of founders, and they point table-thumping alpha males from Silicon Valley who are sort of there to deliver what they want, which is shit or bust, frankly. It's just short-term stuff. So here's my emerging theory. We are not going to get great leaders until we do what people are increasingly saying in the commentary at the Financial Times. We need to recognize we're living in a broken system. It is, modern capitalism in the form into which it's evolved is broken. It's heading for the rocks, and we need to systematically re-engineer it, root to branch, including allowing space for the right kind of leaders that we're going to have to need in volume, rather than just rely on God or whoever to get into the brain of Ray Anderson and turn him into a wonderful sustainability leadership leader.
But the great leaders are great listeners. There's no point in if you know what you think, what's going to come out of your own mouth. A good leader is somebody who is out there, listening, especially to their staff, to their customers, writing things down, and then reacting. And that, yeah. So I think that's your very, very, very important point.
Jakob.
Just on Jeremy's point. I mean, I think, yeah, I concur with what Richard's saying, and I think Jim Collins champions the level 5 leadership in his book, which I think sold millions of copies now, and so that's becoming conventional wisdom amongst certain sort of business circles. The thing about Walmart, Walmart was successful as well because you had this huge family shareholding. The Walton family are anchor shareholders, and that helps quite a lot with these large public companies like Ford, Walmart, in that you have the family that have this anchor shareholding, and the CEO feels comfortable on that basis, and the family-run companies sometimes are championing the way on sustainability because these are family companies who see themselves, whose businesses have been handed down through 3 generations, from Henry Ford in the case of Ford, and Sam Walton, now it's I think the 3rd generation, and they see it continuing for another 3 or 4 generations. So you have a very long-term perspective with shareholders. So that I think is one of the reasons why Walmart could lead the way, because the family were thinking about not just the next quarter or and that's Eric's point. They were thinking about not just the next generation, but 3 generations on, their grandchildren and so on. So I think that's one of the issues as well.
Okay, so I'm going to take Jakob, then a couple more.
I wonder whether Jonathan would agree with that.
Well, I was
wondering. I was watching him.
I'm being quite neutral here in my role as facilitator.
You're allowed to talk.
You don't think
I'm loving your new challenge.
So, Jonathan, you don't believe that public companies with strong family shareholders?
I know what Jonathan was thinking in his head at the time. It'll be more to do with the wealth of those families, I think, that he'd be objecting to. But anyway.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
But I'm challenged by the Walmart model as a sustainability success story, because this is still one of the companies that screws more individual members of its staff than almost any other company on the planet.
Financially?
Just in every single way. Every single way. So that's why I'm trying to be completely neutral in this discussion. In case I don't say any more things like that. So we've got...
They're not guests of ours, don't worry.
No, exactly. So we've got time for a few more quick comments. Jakob, and then I'm going to go here, and then this is last time for anybody who wants to say anything from the floor, then I'm going to ask...
Two more, because I'm waiting to get to the loo.
Right, okay, so Jakob?
Just one comment from my experience. I remember being told about 10 years ago it was impossible to invite me to address the business audience because I just make them angry. And then, in the last few years, I get these surprising invitations from, businesses and business associations. And so I thought, well, my message is still the same. So I wondered what has changed. And, I would ask these managers and CEOs. And not once was I told, well, even I introduced this triple bottom line, and so we thought it would be good to have you. Basically, they said 2 things. They either said, I'm tired after a hard day's work to come home and be told by my children at dinner that I'm ruining their world. Mm-hmm. And the second thing was the young people, the bright young people we need to attract. They know, even in this uncertain economic climate, that they can choose who they go to. And they come and they question us, and they only want to work for sustainable companies. And that seems to be the main motivation.
Very good point. Susan, can we get a microphone to the little desk there? Possible, thank you very much. Anybody else on this side of the room? Last chance. Okay. Susan.
Sorry, I tickle in my throat.
Ask a really long question.
I won't.
So,
I will.
Richard struggles. You're obviously desperate to go to the loo.
That's so mean.
Let's make Richard laugh as well. Should we tickle him?
Don't pour any water near me. In the U.S., we have a significant number of companies, major corporations that are making great strides in sustainability, and really, really amazing work they're doing. But in many cases, they're still employing slave labor in third world countries. And I would just say to the panel, or I'd ask, what do you advise them to do? Because again, they're under that pressure of quarterly earnings. But in my mind, and then I think in a lot of people's minds, they're not truly sustainable if they're paying 5 cents a day to their employees to pay back their shareholders.
Yeah, no, that's a very specific challenge about, in coming back to the notion of sustainability, being as much to do with the economic and social factors as with the environmental factors. And you certainly see that in the supply chains of many of these.
I mean, they're taking an enormous risk, because if they really are, if it really is slave labour, you know, I mean, I know slave in open inverted commas, the chances in this world of, you know, where the press are, you know, always looking for a good news story of them getting exposed is massive. You know, so you then, I suppose, have to question: is it really slave labour, or is it actually, you know, are they being paid a little bit more, and therefore, you know, it's actually perhaps good for them to get that money. So, that's what the press, you know, the press who are there to sort of check up on companies need to ask themselves. So, I don't know if anybody else got anything.
I mean, I think back to the thing, I think we'll see entrepreneurial companies, slightly more progressive companies leading the way, and others will have to follow. And I think one of the things we really need to do is change how we measure chief executives, because measurement and behavior has a direct correlation. What you measure results in how people behave. So I think that's the fundamental thing we need to do at the very beginning, is change the measurements.
Yeah, very good. Tim?
Very good. I want to conclude by saying something a little bit contentious. Which
no
is,
swear words.
Right, okay. which is good manners destroy most chief executives, because we forget, all of us forget. Everybody in this room is smart, yeah? We're smart. You wouldn't be here if you weren't smart. So why do you waste so much of your life in meetings listening to people gabbling on and on and on and on, right? The part of this thing, my dad once said to me, the secret of being a leader is to lose your fear of being disliked, which is not the same thing as being a bastard. It's losing your fear of being disliked, which means that you stop giving artificial consideration for people who are using up your life and getting you out of track with what's important to you. It is a fact, apparently, that almost every chief executive, when they get into the job, have huge visions of strategic change, what they're going to do, what they're going to do the other. Inside 3 months, almost all chief executives have lost the will to live and are doing the daily grind. Why? Because they weren't strong enough to fire the people that weren't good enough at their jobs, so they actually end up doing half the jobs of everybody else. And they also have meetings in which people are taking an hour in which to tell them something they could have done in 5 minutes, but they're too polite to say so. So at Eden, I have a situation, because I get angry and angry about it, you can have 5 minutes now, and I will listen to you with complete concentration, or an hour at the end of the week. And what's amazing is how quickly a team learns to distill quite complicated ideas into a very short period of time. And it actually creates great clarity. And then you've got 55 minutes to go and drink a glass of Chablis if you wish to, invent a new invention, do whatever it is. But it's a horrible thing to say, but you could say to an awful lot of people, why are you wasting my life with yours?
Anyway, I just wanted to say I'm leaving straight after lunch, and to say thank you very much for an incredible few days. This place is beautiful. The staff are all moving to the Virgin Islands. Thank you very much. We're taking all the food with us.
The plane's arriving in 2 hours.
We're lifting a few of these buildings off. Which are absolutely lovely. The dinner last night was to die for. The building there was beautiful, incredible. So I just want to say thank you very, very much. It's been great and lovely meeting everybody, and I think a lot of really good ideas have come out of this. We had a little get together last night with the president, with the idea maybe of getting a Virgin Island group of maybe 15 presidents together, which actually we're sort of on the map anyway, and then a group of presidents from this region to here, and then one other group in the Pacific, and really try to make something really positive come out of all of this. So I'm sure it will. Anyway, thanks very much. Cheers.
Well, Richard, thank you.
Thank you.